Imagine a man, his skin coated in a sticky resin, then covered head to toe in fine gold dust. He shimmers in the Andean sun, a living statue of pure gold, before plunging into the dark waters of a sacred lake. This wasn't a myth. It was a ceremony. This vivid scene isn't fantasy. It's detailed in a priest's manuscript from 1636, compiled from eyewitness accounts of the first conquerors. But how did this ritual of a golden man transform into the legend of a golden city? For centuries, treasure hunters chased this phantom metropolis, even attempting to drain the entire lake. The official histories celebrate their ambition, but they omit what was truly found in the mud and silt. We have the inventories, the exact measurements of the recovered gold, and the engineering plans that prove their near success. But what these records don't show, what has been ignored for centuries, is the final, brutal cost of their obsession. To understand the legend, you must confront the truth of what happened when the digging went too deep. And now, please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. This is not a natural feature. It is a scar, carved into the rim of Lake Guatavita by an obsession. An obsession with a city of gold that supposedly lay beneath these waters. What could drive men, 400 years ago, to try and drain an entire lake with nothing but shovels and raw determination? His name was Antonio de Sepulveda, a wealthy Spanish merchant in the 1580s who was so convinced by the stories that he secured a royal license to empty the lake. Using thousands of indigenous laborers, his workers carved this massive notch into the crater's edge. It was a brutal, staggering feat of manual engineering. And it worked. Graphics based on colonial-era surveys show that he succeeded in lowering the water by a staggering 20 meters, or 65 feet. As the water receded, the muddy shoreline began to reveal its secrets. On the exposed lakebed, his workers found what he was looking for. His official inventory, a verifiable document, lists the discovery of over 12 pesos of gold artifacts, votive figures, crowns, ceremonial staffs, and a single, spectacular emerald, described as being the size of a hen's egg. He had proved it. There was a fortune in Guatavita. But the obsession didn't die with him. In 1909, a British company called Contractors Limited brought the full force of the Industrial Revolution to this remote lake. They used steam pumps and tunneled through the mountain to drain the lake completely. Archival photos show the lakebed exposed to the sky. A muddy, empty bowl. But they were defeated by a physical reality more challenging than any myth. The bottom was a thick, viscous layer of mud and silt, nearly 40 feet deep. When the Andean sun baked it, the mud hardened into a surface like cement, trapping any treasure beneath an impenetrable shield. Before they could excavate, the rainy season returned and filled the lake again, ending the dream forever. The treasure was real, the gold was real, but it wasn't a city. So, what was it? To find the truth, we have to go back to the moment the legend was born. Before anyone ever dreamed of draining a lake, the legend of El Dorado began here. In 1537, with a brutal march of desperation and greed. We have to go back to Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada, a Spanish lawyer turned conquistador, leading a ragged army of 800 men away from the Caribbean coast and into the unknown heart of the continent. Their 9-month journey is a nightmare of historical record. Maps trace their route through impenetrable swamps and up into the unforgiving Andean highlands. A vertical jungle where the air thinned and the temperatures plummeted. They were tormented by insects, starved to the point of eating their own leather belts, and stalked by disease and hostile tribes. Fewer than 200 of the original 800 men would survive. Just as their expedition was about to collapse, they stumbled out of the jungle and onto a high plateau. The home of a civilization they had never encountered, the Muisca. This was a sophisticated society of farmers, weavers, and, most importantly, master goldsmiths. For the Muisca, gold was not currency. It was a sacred metal, a conduit to the gods, and they worked it into breathtakingly intricate art. For Quesada's starving men, it was the answer to their prayers. After a series of violent encounters, the Spanish captured the Muisca capital and its ruler. And it's here, in Quesada's own chronicle, the Epitome, that the legend finds its factual anchor. This isn't myth. It's accounting. Quesada's own records state that from a single Muisca leader, his men seized a precisely documented treasure: 191,194 pesos of fine gold, 37,288 pesos of lower-grade gold, and 18,390 pesos of silver. This staggering, verifiable quantity of gold proved the region's wealth was real. When news of this golden pile spread, it acted like gasoline on the fire of European greed. The story began to grow with every telling. But here is the crucial contradiction that history often ignores. Quesada's precise, almost clinical, documentation lists artifacts, breastplates, crowns, and figurines. He describes a massive haul of treasure, but he never once mentions a city paved with gold. That idea, the metropolis of El Dorado, was a fabrication that came later. The initial, verifiable discovery was of a rich culture, not a golden city. So, what transformed this documented pile of gold into the myth of an entire empire of it? The Spanish found the treasure. But then they started hearing the Muisca's stories. And one story in particular captivated them. A story not about a place, but about a man. The Spanish found the treasure. But then they started hearing the Muisca's stories, and one story in particular captivated them. A story not about a place, but about a man. The confusion came down to a simple translation. The real name of the legend was not El Dorado, the place, but El Dorado, the man, the Gilded One. The full, astonishing details of this ritual were preserved by the son of a conquistador, a priest named Juan Rodriguez Fraile, who documented the oral histories of both the Spanish and the Muisca in his 1636 manuscript, El Carnero. His work is a window into a lost world, describing the investiture ceremony for a new Muisca chieftain. On the day he took power, the heir was brought to the shores of the sacred Lake Guatavita. Fraile writes, "They stripped the heir to his skin and coated him with a sticky earth on which they set gold dust, so that he was completely covered with this metal." Imagine the sight. A man transformed into a living idol, his skin invisible beneath a shimmering layer of pure gold. He was then placed upon a raft, a vessel laden with the finest treasures of his people, emeralds, and intricate gold offerings. As horns, flutes, and chanting echoed across the circular walls of the crater lake, 4 subordinate chiefs paddled the raft to the dead center of the deep, dark water. In the silence that followed, he would cast the treasures into the lake as an offering to the gods, and then plunge himself in, washing the gold from his body, a sacrifice to ensure a prosperous reign. For centuries, this was only a story, a fantastical tale in a dusty manuscript. Then, in 1969, in a small cave not far from Bogotá, a group of farmers found this, the Muisca raft. It is a miniature, perfect depiction of the ceremony. A physical snapshot of the legend itself. The piece is tiny, measuring just 19.5 centimeters long, small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. Forensic analysis confirmed its authenticity. Metallurgical tests show it's made from a tumbaga alloy of 80% gold. And the visual detail is stunning. Here is the chieftain, cast larger than the others, standing in the center. He is surrounded by his attendants on the ceremonial raft, all poised for the final offering. This single object, lost for centuries, provides undeniable proof. The story was true. El Dorado was real. It was a sacred, spiritual act of profound significance. But this beautiful ritual would soon collide with the brutal greed of an empire, and the sacred waters of Guatavita would be targeted for a treasure that was paid for not just in gold, but in blood. That single, beautiful artifact, the Muisca raft, represents a sacred, spiritual act of profound significance. But this beautiful ritual would soon collide with the brutal greed of an empire, and the sacred waters of Guatavita would be targeted for a treasure that was paid for not just in gold, but in blood. The gilded ceremony was a sacred offering, but the European search for its source was anything but sacred. Let's go back to Antonio de Sepulveda and his massive cut, the scar still visible on the lake's rim today. In Part 1, we presented it as a staggering feat of 16th century engineering. It was. But the official records that celebrate the gold he found conveniently omit the most disturbing detail of his venture. The thousands of laborers digging that massive trench were not willing volunteers. They were indigenous Muisca, forced into service. Working with basic tools under horrific conditions, they dug deeper and deeper into the unstable earth of the crater wall. And one day, the inevitable happened. The saturated walls of the massive trench gave way, collapsing inwards with a sound like thunder, burying an unknown number of workers under tons of wet earth and rock. There was no rescue. The first major hunt for El Dorado's treasure ended in a mass grave. A detail erased by the glint of the 12 pesos of gold he recovered. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the business model of the entire conquest. That verifiable golden pile we talked about, the 191,000 pesos documented by Quesada? It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a trade. We have the documentation of the treasure, but we must remember how it was acquired. The Spanish chronicles themselves describe the torture of Muisca leaders to force them to reveal where their gold was hidden. This wasn't a trade. It was looted during a violent conquest that shattered the Muisca world. The price of that gold was paid in blood. This is the pattern of omission that defines the legend of El Dorado. For 5 centuries, popular history has focused on the romance of the quest, on the adventure of the explorers staring at maps, on the shine of the treasure itself. It is a story told from the perspective of the treasure hunter, not the people whose sacred objects were being stolen and whose people were being killed. The reality is that the foundation of this glittering myth is built upon the brutal exploitation of human beings. The legend wasn't just a fantasy. It was a justification for conquest, for slavery, and for stripping a culture of its sacred heritage. An understanding that changes everything, forcing us to ask one final question. What does the enduring power of this myth tell us about ourselves? That brutality, born from a simple misunderstanding, forces us to ask one final question. What does the enduring power of this myth tell us about ourselves? So, was El Dorado real? The city? No. It was a phantom, a ghost story born of greed and a profound cultural misinterpretation. It was a fever dream that drove men to obsession and ruin. But the man El Dorado, the Gilded One, was absolutely real. His ceremony, a sacred and beautiful offering to the gods, was the spark that ignited a 500-year-long fire. And even now, modern science can still find the echoes of those ancient flames. Today, forensic geology gives us a new kind of proof, a way to see the past written in the earth itself. Scientists have taken sediment cores from the bottom of Lake Guatavita, pulling up layers of mud that act like a timeline stretching back thousands of years. They weren't looking for gold. They were looking for pollen and charcoal. And in the layers corresponding to the Muisca era, they found a dramatic, undeniable spike in maize pollen and charcoal deposits. It's the chemical footprint of civilization. It's the microscopic evidence of massive crowds gathering on these shores, of large-scale agriculture to feed them, and ceremonial fires burning through the night. It is the scientific confirmation of what the stories have always said, that this lake was the center of a vibrant spiritual world, a place where people gathered to witness their gilded man. Ultimately, the story of El Dorado is more than a treasure hunt. It's a fundamental clash of worldviews, captured in a single, shining metal. For the Muisca, gold was sacred, a spiritual offering whose value was in its connection to the sun and the gods. It was meant to be given away. For the conquistadors, gold was currency, a symbol of imperial power, personal wealth, and a justification for conquest. It was meant to be taken. The collision of these two beliefs created a legend that would echo for centuries. The Golden City was never found, because it never existed. The real treasure was the story itself. A story that, for 500 years, has shown us the dazzling power of myth and the darkness that can be unleashed in its pursuit.